On a morning in early 1943 at the Guadalcanal Theater, 2nd Lieutenant John George lay in ambush within a ruined bunker. His eyes were glued to the scope of his Winchester Model 70, a weapon that, for weeks, had been the target of ridicule from his comrades. At 27 years old, despite being a champion marksman in the state of Illinois, George had yet to achieve a practical feat on the Pacific Front. Meanwhile, Japanese sniper forces were becoming a terror at Point Cruz. In just 3 days, 14 American soldiers had been killed at the hands of 11 Japanese shooters hiding in ancient, towering trees. The difference between George and the military lay in the weapon. While American soldiers were issued the 8-round semi-automatic Garand, George used 2 years of personal savings to buy a professional 5-round bolt-action rifle. His superiors had once ordered him to leave that toy at home and bring a real weapon to battle. But George knew the value of his Lyman Alaskan scope, something that could help him see what the naked eye and standard-issue rifles were completely powerless against. After witnessing the depletion of troops due to sniping, the battalion commander summoned George. He needed a solution for the ghosts in the trees who were killing people faster than a plague. George confidently affirmed his ability. He could hit a 4-inch target at a distance of 300 yards. The night before the battle, George quietly cleaned his rifle. He loaded specialized .30-06 hunting ammunition instead of standard military rounds. At dawn on January 22, he entered the bunker alone, requiring no spotter or radio operator. The targets were giant banyan trees rising up to 90 feet, where Japanese soldiers often hid in dense hollows. At 9:17 a.m., through his 2.5x magnification scope, George spotted a slight movement nearly 90 feet up a tree 240 yards away. It was a Japanese shooter focused on an American supply route. George adjusted for windage, held his breath, and pulled the trigger. The shot rang out sharply, breaking the silence of the jungle. The target fell freely from the treetop to the ground. Not stopping there, George understood that Japanese snipers often moved in pairs. He patiently scanned every leaf. Less than 30 minutes later, he spotted a second target attempting to climb down to retreat. Another shot rang out, and the second man collapsed. 2 rounds, 2 confirmed kills. For George, this was no longer a shooting practice at Camp Perry. This was a life-and-death duel where the smallest mistake cost a life. The battle was far from over. Near noon, a Japanese bullet slammed into a sandbag just inches from George's head, splashing dirt into his face. This time, the shot came from a completely new direction, the southwest. George quickly rolled away, pressing himself against the bunker wall. He understood his position had been compromised. The enemy now knew a formidable American sniper was present. The confrontation between a civilian shooting champion and Japan's professional jungle warriors officially entered its most intense phase. George remained motionless for 3 minutes to assess the situation before creeping back into a firing position. He used his scope to meticulously scan the thickets to the southwest. In the art of sniping, the golden rule is, shoot and move. However, in the dense jungle terrain, finding a new hiding spot was an extreme challenge. At 11:38 a.m., George spotted a third target hiding 73 feet up in a cluster of 5 banyan trees. This Japanese shooter had made a mistake by only changing branches instead of changing trees entirely. George calmly placed the crosshairs on the stationary dark shape and squeezed the trigger. The sniper fell in silence. By midday, 5 Japanese shooters had been eliminated. George's reputation spread far. Those who once called his rifle a toy now wanted to see him perform in person. But he refused them all, as the presence of a crowd would only make him an easy target for the Japanese. After these losses, the Japanese snipers began to be more cautious, freezing nearly all movement under daylight. January 23 began with murky tropical rains. It wasn't until 8:45 a.m., when the rain thinned, that George could get to work. At 9:12 a.m., he spotted a Japanese soldier who had taken advantage of the sound of rain to climb to a position 290 yards away, a much safer distance than previous targets. The Japanese were learning to adapt to his range. George's shot terminated the sixth man, but this time he met a fierce response. Only minutes later, Japanese mortars began shelling George's bunker based on his muzzle flash. Predicting the next round would hit the mark, George grabbed his rifle and fled. He managed to dive into a bomb crater just as his old position exploded into smoke and fire. He had to immediately relocate to a fallen tree 120 yards away to set up a new position. That afternoon, the game turned. The Japanese sent their most elite shooters to hunt George back. This was no longer a target practice, but a death match between professionals. Using his superior skill, George downed the seventh man at 14:23 and the eighth at 15:41, who had revealed a silhouette against the sky at 94 feet. At the end of 2 days, George reported 8 confirmed kills with only 12 rounds. In his tent that night, he performed a cold calculation. There were 11 originally, now only 3 remained. These 3 were the most dangerous, the longest survivors, and they certainly knew the characteristics of this American sniper. At dawn on the 24th, George stealthily moved to a large rock formation, a position the Japanese were unlikely to suspect. At 8:17 a.m., he spotted target number 9 hiding in a palm tree at a height of only 40 feet. The thick palm fronds provided excellent cover from the ground, but from George's elevated position, he could see right through them. George's finger was on the trigger, but then he stopped. Intuition told him something was too convenient. After 3 days of being nearly wiped out, seasoned Japanese shooters would not make such a clumsy mistake. This was a bait. He patiently scanned the surrounding trees for 11 breathless minutes. Finally, he discovered the real threat. Another sniper was lying in ambush on a banyan tree 80 yards away. He was 91 feet up, perfectly covered by vines, and pointing his rifle directly at George's old position. He was just waiting for George to fire at the bait in the palm tree to deliver the killing blow. George faced a dilemma. If he shot the real assassin, the report of the Winchester would immediately betray his current position to the bait. If he remained silent, the enemy would eventually find where he was hiding. George decided to turn the enemy's bait into his own trap. He squeezed the trigger to take down the decoy sniper in the palm tree, then immediately swung his scope toward the banyan tree 91 feet up. As predicted, the gunshot caused the hidden sniper to react. A small shift appeared as he turned to locate the sound. Before the enemy could recover, George placed the crosshairs on the dark shape and fired. 2 rounds for 2 corpses. However, the price was that his position was now exposed. George immediately grabbed his rifle and ran, diving into a drainage ditch 40 yards away just before Japanese machine gun fire shredded the rock pile where he had just stood. After waiting for the hail of bullets to stop, George quietly moved another 100 yards east, choosing a water-filled bomb crater as his next hiding spot. 10 were dead, only 1 remained. This was certainly the most veteran, the one who had witnessed all of George's tactics over the past 3 days. At 9:47 a.m., George realized a chilling truth. The 11th man was not hiding in a tree but was crawling on the ground, approaching his position through ferns and vines. He was hunting George exactly how George had hunted his comrades. The Japanese sniper stopped 40 yards from the rock pile to observe. Patience was now the ultimate weapon. George lay still in the water, waiting for the prey to lead himself into the trap rather than forcing a risky shot. At 10:03 a.m., the Japanese shooter entered the old machine gun nest at the rocks, but he pointed his barrel toward the drainage ditch, the spot George had abandoned. Though the enemy's back was exposed at a distance of 38 yards, George did not fire. Instinct told him that a man who survived 10 days of battle would never expose himself so carelessly. Scanning the surroundings meticulously, George discovered the truth: there were two soldiers, not one. The second man was hiding behind a fallen tree 70 yards away, ready to shoot anyone who revealed themselves to attack the man at the rocks. Once again, the Japanese were using bait. With a bolt-action rifle, George knew he couldn't take down both at once if they were in a position to counterattack. George chose a bold solution: he submerged deep into the water, leaving only his eyes exposed and keeping his rifle barrel dry. After 10 minutes of waiting without any movement, the two Japanese soldiers believed George had retreated further east and began to leave their positions to conduct a sweep. As they passed the bomb crater and completely exposed their backs, George rose from the water like a ghost. Water dripping from his darkened face, he brought the Winchester to his shoulder. Two crisp shots rang out in an instant. Both targets collapsed. 11 snipers had been eliminated with exactly 11 rounds over 3 days. George had cleared the threat for the regiment. However, the joy was short-lived. Just as he was about to collect his shell casings, Japanese shouting erupted from the tree line. A squad of Japanese soldiers was rushing in. The hunt was over, but the survival escape through the cold, muddy water had only just begun. George submerged into the water, leaving only his eyes to observe and holding the Winchester vertically to protect the barrel. Footsteps and the clashing of equipment grew louder. These were no longer snipers, but a Japanese infantry squad of at least 6 men approaching the bodies. By 10:28 a.m., the atmosphere became suffocating as the Japanese squad did not retreat but began following the mud tracks leading straight to George's bomb crater. Facing a 1-on-6 ratio with only 5 rounds left in a bolt-action rifle, George understood a direct firefight was inevitable. When the first Japanese soldier appeared at the edge of the pit and their eyes met, George fired from beneath the water. He operated the bolt with lightning speed while still submerged, then rose up to take down 2 more who were closing in. With 3 rounds left and the enemy shouting all around, George was forced to abandon the water hole, sprinting north to find a new spot behind a fallen tree. Japanese rifle fire tore through the air, shredding the ground around George as the enemy fired blindly toward the sound. He kept a cool head, used his scope to identify a target, and downed the lead man in the pursuit group. However, realizing he was being flanked from 2 sides by overwhelming fire, George made a life-saving decision: retreat. He ran like the wind through layers of vines and thick jungle brush, letting branches whip his face. After 90 seconds of racing with death, he dove into a dry shell crater to lose his pursuers. At this point, George had only 2 rounds left, his body was soaked, and mud covered his weapon. He quietly moved through the blind spots of the terrain, heading toward American lines. At 11:13 a.m., after moments of extreme tension, he reached his comrade's safe zone. At headquarters, instead of a disciplinary report for acting without orders, Second Lieutenant George received admiration from senior officers. Colonel Ferry, the regimental commander, met him personally with an important proposal: to establish and train a professional sniper section for the entire division. The military prepared 14 Springfield rifles with unertl scopes and 40 elite marksmen for George to train. However, George made a single condition: he wanted to continue using his personal Winchester Model 70, the partner that had survived life and death with him. The request was granted. From a man ridiculed for a mail-order toy, John George became the founder of modern sniper techniques in the Pacific Theater. His Winchester was no longer a luxury item, it had become a symbol of precision and courage. On January 27, training officially began. George gathered 40 soldiers at a temporary range east of Henderson Field. Although they were excellent marksmen on paper with iron sights at 500 yards, in reality, none had combat experience as snipers or in killing targets from concealment. George focused on core techniques, breath control, trigger squeeze, and wind reading skills. The Springfield rifles with unertl scopes weighed 11 pounds, though stable, they were a burden for long-term operations. He taught them to utilize any natural cover like rocks, tree trunks, or sandbags as a rest. After 3 days of rigorous training from stationary to concealed moving targets, 32 men qualified by consistently hitting man-sized targets at 300 yards. George divided them into 2-man teams, a shooter and an observer, carrying binoculars and a Garand. This coordination ensured security and the ability to switch roles flexibly in combat. In early February, George took the teams into the field west of the Matanicoa River to sweep for remaining Japanese groups. In one ambush on a supply trail, George's team took down 6 targets with just 7 rounds. By the end of the first day, the sniper section had eliminated a total of 23 Japanese soldiers without suffering any losses. By February 9, the confirmed kill count reached 74. As the Japanese were frantically evacuating at night at Cape Esperance, George's section played a vital role in neutralizing the enemy's rear guard. However, on February 7, an enemy bullet pierced George's left shoulder. Though the wound missed the bone, he was forced to leave the battlefield for treatment at a field hospital. While George recovered, the Japanese completed their withdrawal from Guadalcanal. His sniper section was officially recognized after 12 days of effective operation, and George was nominated for the Bronze Star. George's war entered a new chapter when he volunteered for a top-secret mission in Burma. In March 1943, he boarded a ship across the Pacific toward India with his Winchester Model 70. There, George joined a special unit of 3,000 troops, later famous as Merrill's Marauders, the 5,307th Composite Unit. This was a force trained in long-range penetration, survival, and independent operation deep behind enemy lines for long periods. Although officially an infantry platoon leader, George's reputation for sniping from Guadalcanal earned him special attention from the battalion command. Training in India prepared them for challenges harsher than Guadalcanal, steep terrain, relentless jungle rain, and an enemy who knew the land. Here, the skills of a marksman capable of downing targets at 600 yards like George became an invaluable asset for the upcoming jungle campaigns. Preparing for the Burma theater, George understood that the battles here would be entirely different from Guadalcanal. Instead of short-term operations, he would have to participate in patrols lasting weeks across hundreds of miles of jungle. To reduce the load, George made critical improvements to his Winchester Model 70. He replaced the Lyman Alaskan scope with a lighter Weaver 330 and swapped the wooden stock for a lighter synthetic material. These changes reduced the rifle's weight from 9 pounds 12 ounces to 8 pounds 14 ounces. In a long-range march with 60 pounds of gear on his back, cutting every ounce of weight was the key to maintaining endurance. In February 1944, Merrill's Marauders officially entered Burma. The unit's mission was to capture Myitkyina Airfield, a vital supply link for the Allies. They had to move through terrain considered impassable, high mountains, thick jungle, and no trails. All supplies had to be carried on their backs or by pack mules. By March, George's battalion had covered 217 miles and experienced 12 encounters with the Japanese. Throughout the grueling 700-mile journey, George used the Winchester only 3 times. He took down a Japanese commander at 412 yards, destroyed a machine gun nest from 380 yards, and eliminated a sniper at 290 yards. George always followed the principle, a single shot to keep his position secure, then immediately moved before the distinctive report of the Winchester could be located by the enemy. In May 1944, the Marauders captured Myitkyina airfield. Although tactically successful, the cost in human life was immense. The strength dropped from 5,300 to fewer than 3,000, mainly due to malaria and dysentery. In Burma, George realized that the reality of the battlefield was changing. Most battles occurred at close range, under 50 yards, where dense vegetation left little room for long-range sniper rifles. Although the Winchester Model 70 remained a masterpiece, George understood that the future of war belonged to semi-automatic weapons like the Garand. Adaptation and flexibility were the decisive factors for victory in modern combat conditions. After the unit disbanded in June 1944, George was sent back to the United States and promoted to captain. At Fort Benning, he became a trainer for infantry officers in marksmanship and small unit tactics. He passed on all his experience from Guadalcanal to Burma, from stealthy movement to independent combat skills. The legendary Winchester Model 70 was now kept in his footlocker. It had traveled halfway around the world, from the forests of Illinois to the mud of Guadalcanal and the high mountains of Burma, killing at least 14 confirmed targets. As the war moved toward its end in Europe and the Pacific, John George never fired another shot in anger, but his lessons and skills became a valuable part of the U.S. military's training legacy. The era of individual marksmen owning their own weapons was fading. The military began moving towards standardization, mass production, interchangeable parts, and soldiers who were trained and equipped identically. George understood the necessity of modern warfare on an industrial scale, but he also felt a great loss, the individual craft of the soldier, the idea that an exceptional individual with the right weapon could turn the tide of a battle. In January 1947, George was discharged with the rank of lieutenant colonel and a host of high honors. He returned to Illinois, used the GI Bill to study politics at Princeton University, and graduated as valedictorian in 1950. This was followed by an academic journey at Oxford and long years of political research in British East Africa before becoming a senior consultant on international affairs in Washington, D.C. For decades, George kept his memories of Point Cruz or the Burma Jungle private. Colleagues only knew he had served, but no one knew about the Winchester Model 70 quietly lying in its case at his home. In 1947, he decided to write down his experiences, initially just to preserve personal records of jungle weapons and tactics. The manuscript of over 400 pages, titled Shots Fired in Anger, was eventually published on the advice of the National Rifle Association, NRA. Without the need for flowery words or romanticized heroism, the book won over readers with its absolute technical accuracy and fierce practical observations. To this day, it remains a classic, cherished by historians and World War II small arms collectors as a model reference book. John George died on January 3, 2009, at the age of 90. He witnessed the U.S. military go through many other wars, saw the birth of modern rifle lines from the M14 to the M16, and the complete professionalization of the sniper force. His Winchester Model 70 is currently on display at the National Firearms Museum in Virginia. In the eyes of ordinary visitors, it is just an old hunting rifle. But to history, it is the weapon that proved the power of individual marksmanship, the thing that wiped out the threat at Point Cruz in just 4 days, a task an entire battalion had been stuck on for 2 weeks. It is not just a rifle, but a testament to the iron will and the visionary perspective of a soldier. John George's story is proof that individual skill combined with an understanding of one's tools can create extraordinary feats. From a ridiculed civilian marksman, he became a symbol of professionalism and amazing adaptability. If the story of John George inspired you, help us spread it by hitting like. Every interaction you make helps these forgotten heroic stories in the archives get a chance to reach more people. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss any legends of courage. Leave a comment to let us know where you are watching from and if anyone in your family ever served in the military. Your presence is how we together keep these heroic memories from ever fading. Thank you for joining us and helping John George's name live on forever.